One of the reasons I find Dune so fascinating is its ability to leave you with terrifying questions long after you've turned the last page. What starts as a seemingly simple narrative evolves into a profound philosophical discussion, almost offering a solution to save the world. Well, almost. See, Dune isn't just about sandworms and messiahs. After reading the first three books of Dune, I found that beneath all the spice and prophecy is a creeping dilemma. Not the kind you immediately notice, but the kind that slowly settles in when you think everything is going right. Paul Atreides was supposed to save us from this, but somewhere along the way, even he failed. In Children of Dune, we start to see what that failure costs and what might come next. A strange, uncomfortable plan begins to take shape. It challenges our morality, our systems of leadership, and even our sense of free will. It's not a clear answer, and it's definitely not a comforting one, but it's there, lurking. And that's what I want to explore today. In this video, I want to explore a concept I once dismissed as stupid. The idea that Children of Dune provides the answer to saving humanity. And spoiler alert, it's a bit ugly. So this is a mental exercise before I finally read God Emperor of Dune, which, yes, now I realize that I should have read first. Also, a fair spoiler warning. This video will include mild spoilers up to Children of Dune. The thing I see many people forgetting is that Dune is set many years into the future. Maybe because our lack of truly imagining scale or our puny sense of time, we sometimes forget that 20,000 years is a huge amount of time. Paul Atreides was born in the year 10,173 AG. Here, AG means after Guild, after space travel was invented. And according to the Dune lore, there were around 10,000 years of human history before the Guild era even began. That's a huge amount of time, and I believe that this was intentional by Frank Herbert. See, in those thousands of years, humanity sort of accepted inactivity. After the Butlerian Jihad, the devastating war against artificial intelligence, mankind stopped progressing. Sure, individual planets faced hardship and chaos, but on a universal scale, humanity paused, and Frank Herbert calls this stagnation. There is something terrifying about a universe that never changes, a world in which progress halts, ideas repeat themselves, and growth becomes a distant memory. And among so many themes and messages in Dune, I find the concept of stagnation immensely interesting. See, in Frank Herbert's view, stagnation is not something to be cherished. After the start of the Spacing Guild, there came along the schools of Dune, the Bene Gesserit, the Mentat, etc. And among their existence, Frank Herbert hides the cause of stagnation. For example, the whole ideology of the Bene Gesserit is a one supporting pause. So the Bene Gesserit want to bring about the Kwisatz Haderach, a being capable of accessing all ancestral memories and seeing future possibilities. However, their rigid adherence to this plan and their reluctance to adapt exemplify the very stagnation that threatens humanity's future. They are so focused on keeping things going that they forget why change is needed in the first place. The Bene Gesserit weren't just focused, they were obsessed. They didn't guide humanity forward, they looped it in circles. Paul's son, Leto II, calls the Bene Gesserit fools. And the Mentats and the Spacing Guild weren't any different. In the very essence of it, the whole power struggle of Dune represented nothing but stagnation. The great houses, proud pillars of nobility and tradition, masked their inertia behind rituals of power. They chose preservation over progress. They repeated old strategies while the universe quietly decayed around them. And according to Herbert, this was pause in human evolution, which only halted innovation. And he not only expresses his critique on this, but also showed how a stagnant society crumbles under its own weight. And so he does, because what comes next is Paul Muad'Dib Atreides. The Kwisatz Haderach that the Bene Gesserit was so eager to bring about actually arrives without a warning. This is where the events of the first and the second book take place. Paul breaks the so-called stability that these Bene Gesserits were so obsessed to maintain. And this is where Frank Herbert's two separate narratives divide. I'm not saying that these are the only two narratives in Dune, far from it. The universe Herbert created is layered and filled with perspectives, but these two stood out to me the most. See, the first and the second book were about the consequences of leaders, and it's not like Frank Herbert is just against the blind following of leaders. He is against the concept of leadership as a whole. Dune was a warning, and Messiah was the consequence, proof of what happens when that warning is ignored. Paul Atreides, just by his sheer cult like following, unleashes hell upon the living universe. He sterilizes 90 planets, demoralizes another 500, and the resultant death count is in the tens of billions, all in the name of his jihad, all in the name of the fabricated religion of the Bene Gesserit. But you know all this, it's been quoted, montaged, and memified, but what's often missed is what comes next. What Herbert sets up as his second narrative. Herbert doesn't excuse Paul's actions, he presents them with all their weight and contradiction. And just when you think that Paul's story ends in failure, Herbert hints that he may not have gone far enough. Enter Children of Dune, the third book in the Dune series. This is where Herbert opens up about his world saving ideology. Dare I say, he comes out of the closet. See, here we are invited to appreciate Paul Atreides, because Paul Atreides defeated the real villain of Dune. And you might think that it was the Harkonnens, the Corinos, or some might even say it was Paul Atreides himself. But the real villain of Dune aren't any of this. It's Dune itself. For thousands of years, the system of structures ruled over a rotting universe. The great schools, the Lancerad, the great houses adapted stagnation. The universe sort of paused for millennia, repeating the same rituals, preserving the same power structures, and upholding a culture of mediocrity mistaken for stability. And Paul Atreides broke that. He destroyed the very systems of structures which created him. And the paradox here that I find interesting is that Frank Herbert argues that this was necessary. The very thing that makes stagnation so vulnerable is an external or an internal threat. Herbert argues that if society wasn't utterly stagnant, then it would have been able to deal with threats like Paul. And what happened could have been avoided. Herbert argues that even though the Harkonnens and Corinos were far more advanced than the Fremen, they were ultimately crushed. Why? Because they were stagnant while the Fremen moved forward. I would like to note that Herbert isn't trying to justify Paul's actions, but decides to leave us with a moral dilemma. Dune Messiah clearly states that the path Paul took was way better than the paths which were possible. Paul was basically the universe's way of rejecting a backwards ideology. He was the immune system of the universe, while stagnation was a virus. So, the story of Dune is that Paul saved the universe from self destruction, and then everyone lived happily ever after. Except that did not happen. That was a grave flaw. And here's the irony in it. Paul became the very thing he destroyed. His empire, now ruled by Alia as regent, became bloated and decayed, riddled with religious fanaticism and internal power plays. The same rituals, the same hierarchies that Paul broke returned, this time with his name carved into them. Children of Dune, whose narrative invited us to appreciate Paul Atreides, was ironically the same book where the true result of his flawed rule is shown. And that's so peak in my opinion. Sure, the topic of blind following is explored, but it is only in Children of Dune where we see the true consequences of it. The signs were clear in Dune Messiah, but the real effect of Paul's rule is shown in Children of Dune. The Fremen grow weak and degenerate. The same tribe which was undivided and stood strong as a pillar now is broken and dull. The Fremen, once fierce and free, have become obsessed, looping in circles to preserve Paul's myth instead of living his truth. And now the universe comes back to the same place it started. But this is where things get interesting. Enter Leto Atreides, and he says that he has the plan to fix this, not just by stopping the cycle of stagnation, but breaking it altogether. Children of Dune is the point where I see Dune shifting from a political drama to a philosophical book. The two narratives that we talked about before come to meet in this book and give birth to a combination. And I like to see these two narratives as two stories. Paul Atreides being the protagonist of the first one and Leto being the protagonist of the second. Despite his best efforts, Paul could not do what he was supposed to. Being the Kwisatz Haderach, Paul was supposed to lead humanity to a better future. He was supposed to walk the golden path, but he just couldn't do it. As much as I'd like to divide these two narratives, Frank Herbert won't allow me to. Because in the first, Paul is the false messiah, the charismatic leader whose rise brings destruction. And in the second, he's the Kwisatz Haderach, expected to save humanity from stagnation. These two roles might seem contradictory, but in both, Paul is still the problem. Not because he didn't try hard enough, but because his very existence was a symptom of the disease Herbert was pointing at. Paul just couldn't follow the golden path. Wait, what is the golden path? Well, that is where Leto Atreides comes in. A child born in a collapsing universe, raised in the shadow of a false god. Leto doesn't just inherit Paul's legacy, he inherits his burden. Leto is set out to complete what Paul started. The protagonist of the second narrative, or should I say the whole narrative, is not Paul Atreides, it's Leto. And unlike Paul, Leto isn't trying to escape the weight of it. He's trying to carry it further. Children of Dune is where you stop seeing Leto as just Paul's son and start seeing him as something else entirely. Someone willing to do what Paul could not. And this is the golden path. The undoing of what Paul Atreides did. Frank Herbert allows Leto to become the tyrant that Paul could never be. To walk the golden path, Leto knows that he has to become something terrifying, a symbol so absolute, so unshakable that the universe can no longer rely on comfort, prophecy, or control. Paul tried to resist his destiny. Leto embraces it. He understands that to truly break the cycle, he has to rule with an iron fist. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. He becomes the trap humanity cannot escape because only then can they learn to stop being led. Only then can they learn to choose. He wants to shatter the chains of determinism, the same deterministic structures that shaped Paul, that shaped the Bene Gesserit, that shaped everything. Leto sees a future where humanity can no longer be predicted or be manipulated, where it can finally be free. The golden path isn't just about survival, it's about transformation. And that is how to save the world, according to Frank Herbert.
Hold up. Wait a minute.
There is something missing. After reading and kind of understanding Children of Dune, a simple question must arise into your mind. When I first read Children of Dune, I entered it with a normal mindset. I entered it keeping in mind only the first narrative. I thought that by undoing, Leto means to end the blind following of Paul. I thought that he was going to end the endless killings in the name of one man. But as the story progressed and I heard the words that were coming out of Leto Atreides' mouth, I saw a completely different ideology itself. I was in doubt because I asked Herbert a very simple question. This stagnation that you are trying to eliminate, why is it so bad? Don't you think this question should arrive in your mind too? Throughout this video, did you ever stop to question why exactly is stagnation a bad thing? I did. See, I even made sure to express this doubt in my Children of Dune video. Generations will live and die in servitude. Now, if you ask me, that's some straight bullshit. And since then, I haven't really gotten an answer. So let's see the cards we've been dealt with. Frank Herbert vouches that struggle and disruption are a necessary force for humanity's growth and survival. In Dune, stagnation happens when societies and individuals get a little too comfortable. They rely on the same rigid systems which make them weak. But wait, from struggle and disruptions, does Frank Herbert mean wars are a good thing and should happen? Because the Jihad of Muad'Dib was one way to break stagnation, and to that, Frank Herbert says no. He argues that while war is one way to push a stagnant society, it's not the only one. Herbert's point is that civilizations must continuously evolve, and often they only change when faced with extreme pressure. War and revolution force societies to adapt, but these events also come with immense suffering. His characters often struggle with the moral cost of such conflicts, questioning whether the destruction is worth the progress. But I'm not satisfied by that. How? Let's say hypothetically, humans achieve the ideal situation. Who cares if we all go weak by getting too comfortable? At least everyone will have something on their plate. Better to die of comfort than by a guillotine. Why should suffering be the price of evolution. And that's the core of my problem with the golden path. Leto sees stagnation as a disease, but I'm not convinced it's a sickness. Maybe comfort is not the enemy, maybe it's a goal. Because the final outcome of Paul's jihad and what Leto is about to become had to be worse than those thousands of years of stagnation. Be it that people suffered in those years, be it by hunger or by oppressive traditions, but that long rotting slumber of a universe still had to be better than what was coming. Because what Paul unleashed and what Leto carries forward is not peace. It's trauma weaponized as policy. It's survival at the cost of everything else. And Frank Herbert says, exactly. He suggests that true peace isn't about stability but about constant change, which seems to contradict the usual idea of peace as an end to suffering. The jihad is, in fact, a very immoral thing, but compared to the other possibilities that Paul saw in the future, it was a mercy. Leto only wants to bring about this suffering because the idea of peace we are suggesting is just an ideal one. It's a fantasy. So instead of humans fighting within themselves and ending the species, Leto wants to create controlled suffering, where humans have more important things to worry about. Instead of striving for fake statuses like power and money, Leto wants human to strive for survival. So in Herbert's view, the real goal isn't to eliminate struggle, but to make sure we adapt to it, to make sure that something like another Paul Atreides doesn't shake us, to put humanity on a level where it can defend itself against all external threats. So yeah, at this point, I think Frank Herbert has defeated me in an argument because I'm starting to see where he's coming from. Paul Atreides wasn't a solution to stagnation, but was the consequence of it. So now I'm supposed to shake hands and end the video, but Frank Herbert forgot one thing: two steps.
I am always 2 steps ahead.
Because now I ask you, Frank Herbert, if you want to get out of the ideal world, let's get down to the real world. Let's ask the big question: who has the right to do the things we are suggesting? What gave Paul the right to upend the universe? What gave Leto, the so called God Emperor, the right to direct the course of humanity for a millennia to come? Because in reality, we don't have the concept of a Kwisatz Haderach who gets the fancy to do this. This all seems so smart and fancy on paper, but on an individual scale, you cannot convince me that children starving in war is actually beneficial in the long run. On a grand scale, it might look like a necessary sacrifice, but on a personal level, it's horrifying. It sounds like a justification of cruelty disguised as wisdom. Herbert often challenges the idea of long term thinking when it dismisses individual suffering. It's the same problem with Paul in Dune Messiah. His prescience shows him a future where billions suffer, but his attempts to avoid it only create a different kind of suffering. Leto takes it further, accepting the role of a tyrant because he believes the alternative is worse. But the real question is, who decides what is necessary? Who gets to say that millions should suffer for a better future? Who gets to enjoy scientific breakthroughs and inventions while the rest of humanity slowly endures a painful reality? And coming in terms with reality, somewhere along the way, the leaders of humanity will become greedy. The ones sitting on the top will see this as an excuse of their bidding. The only way we can do this is to discard the concept of leaders in and on itself and leave it all on determinism. But then, what makes you think that will not just go extinct fighting each other? Because now there will be no power controlling the chaos. So, this is where the stagnation debate hits a dead end. On one side, it's clear that stagnation is dangerous. Societies that stop evolving eventually decay. But on the other, the kind of actions needed to push humanity forward might clash with our sense of morality, empathy, or even basic human decency. So, nothing moves forward. And that tension, that inability to act despite knowing the stakes, is what makes the whole thing so difficult. Plus, I must also add that Herbert's point of view is such an atheistic view of things, but that's a topic for another video because his perspective fits into this tension in an interesting way. Like his work is interesting and ignorant at the same time. There's a lot more to say about this. That's why I'll save it for another video. And to be fair, this argument and this video as a whole is kind of flawed because I haven't read God Emperor of Dune, and that is the book where the whole golden path will be addressed. So till then, this debate has reached stagnation. If you liked this video or thought that I was wrong at any point, you can comment the proof of my ignorance in the comment section and subscribe because these books are kind of expensive to buy.